Okay, we'll go ahead and hello and welcome. We'll go ahead and we will kick off here so then we can be respectful of everyone's time for our half an hour. Um, Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our podcast, Leveraging Your Emotional Social Intelligence for Growth. Last month during the podcast, we focused on the interpersonal composite and its categories that consist of interpersonal relationships, empathy, and social responsibility. The interpersonal composite focuses on trusting, mutually satisfying relationships and using empathy to enhance these relationships. Along with one's social responsibility to willingly contribute to our social groups and general society, showing concern for the greater good. This week, we're going to focus on the decision-making composite and have a robust conversation after a quick round of introductions. I will get us started. My name is Tyson Werner, and I provide the EQI 2.0 assessment to early careers and senior executives to identify their strengths and work on areas for development to improve their personal and professional growth. This helps them create a positive environment with their direct reports, peers, senior leaders, and outside vendors. I own Evolutionary Talent and partner with Catherine Fasanella, where she updates resumes and I provide the EQI 2.0 assessment to get the individuals ready for their job interviews and identify their strengths. That is a little information on how I use the EQI 2.0 assessment. So let's hear a little bit from Cinzia.
Thank you, Tyson, and hello, everybody. I'm Cinzia. I'm a global leader in a multinational company, and I have a dual hat. I work on culture and employee engagement, but also on leadership development across the globe. And I'm also a coach, and I use EQ a lot in my coaching sessions with my clients, which are internal clients, but also external clients. Kathysue, you want to share something about you?
Sure, thanks so much, and thank you to everyone who is listening with us today. I take an integrated treatment approach when working with clients who suffer from complex trauma, which can lead to emotional dysregulation, feeling unsafe, a decrease or even a void in life purpose, dysfunctional attachment styles, and the inability to identify and react to danger cues. And I've been using the EQI for over 12 years, and I teach all 15 ESI components of our EQ as a comprehensive skill set. And decision making is key to anchoring our ability to emotionally regulate or balance ourselves. And with that, I'll turn it back to Tyson to begin our discussion.
Yes, and thank you. So I want to remind everybody else too that even though we all use the EQI 2.0 assessment, we use it in different settings, kind of like what you heard. We use it in trauma with patients who need assistance there, and we also use it in global communications and connecting people from different parts of the world. So thank you all for joining us today. As a reminder, we want the podcast to be as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand. We will pull you off mute, and we welcome any and all questions. So to get us started, I want to give us a general overview of the EQI 2.0 assessment and the 5 main composite groups that it's composed of. The first is self-perception. The second is self-expression. The third is interpersonal. The fourth is decision-making. And the fifth is stress management. Each one of these composites has 3 subcategories. And today we're going to focus on decision-making. So to start off, I'm going to list those 3 subcategories and a definition so that we're all on the same page and have a same understanding. So the first one, problem solving. It is the ability to find solutions to problems and situations where emotions are involved. Problem solving includes the ability to understand how emotions impact decision making. The second, reality testing, is the capacity to remain objective by seeing things as they really are. This capacity involves recognizing when emotions or personal biases can cause one to be less objective. And the third, impulse control, is the ability to resist or delay an impulse, drive, or temptation to act, and it involves avoiding rash behaviors and decision making. So I'm going to take a quick second. I'm looking through the audience and I see that we don't have any questions, but if anybody has any questions at this point in time, please feel free to raise your hand and we will take those questions. If not, I'm going to move on. And so, to kick us off, to get us started, I want to learn a little bit from Cinzia about problem solving.
Mm, thanks, Tyson. So, problem solving is an interesting area because if we think about our job, all of us, we have been always trained to solve problems, so to say, when getting into a new job, finding a solution for our day-to-day challenges. However, solving problems can be a great skills in certain environments, but maybe it's not useful in others. I'm giving an example as myself. In my corporate job, problem solving is a great skill, but when I coach, I don't have to use problem solving skills. So it's is a skill, a strength I don't use at all. So it's all about a balance. And for all the elements of the emotional intelligence model, it's all about the balance between the different components. One interesting thing is that, for example, asking yourself, how much am I flexible when it comes to finding solutions to my challenges? Am I flexible to get input from others? Do I go straight ahead and don't consider other point of views, other emotions? So when it comes to problem solving, there are different components that we can consider. We can consider how our own emotions impact the decision and or what we do for finding solutions to our challenges. There are components, external components, how others influence us. Do we see the problem objectively? So, a lot of questions that we can ask ourselves in this area. There is also an element of multiculturality, which I always like to bring in. Um, the culture we grow up definitely influence the way we solve problems. And we have the country culture, for example. I'm thinking about cultures in the western part of the world, like in the US or in some European countries, where actions and tasks and go into action mode is fundamental. Other cultures in Asia, for example, in some Asian countries, building the relationship first before going into solution mode is fundamental. Reaching the consensus is fundamental before getting into solution mode for problems. So different aspects for problem solving and different ways emotions get into the way. Sometimes they block us, sometimes they trigger our way to move forward. So problem solving is has to be considered in comparison to other elements, and some of them will be covered by my colleagues, for example, Kathysue, who will talk about reality testing. So problem solving in comparison to reality testing is an interesting element to consider. Kathysue, since I mentioned you, you want to go into this area?
Sure. Thanks so much. And as Tyson mentioned previously, reality testing is a person's ability to see situations as they really are by remaining objective, void of emotions. And oftentimes, when we're emotionally hijacked, we exaggerate the situation or react too quickly. So, the key is to understand when our emotions are getting the better of us so we can better regulate them. Most people can feel when their emotions are increasing, like when you become anxious or stressed, fearful or angry. You can actually feel these emotions physically. Your heart starts to race, your pulse increases, you may even become like red in the face. Everyone experiences emotions differently, so it's important to track your emotions, like in an emotional logbook. during different situations so you learn to identify what causes you to lose control or become less emotionally regulated. And not every situation will cause you to be emotionally hijacked. For instance, I'm pretty good at keeping my own emotions in check, except when it comes to my kids. And and frankly, I'm not sure I'll ever get those emotions in relation to my children in complete check. However, I'm aware of my triggers into an emotionally hijacked occurrence, so I have strategies in place to counter them. For instance, I stop, take a breath, and I count for however long I need to until I get some level of control over my emotions. Another strategy I have is that my kids know this limitation of mine when it comes to them. So, if possible, they preface the conversation with things like, "I'm fine, Mom, however," or "I need to speak with you about something that's bothering me." This way, I have a moment or two to get myself emotionally in check instead of thinking every time that something is dreadfully wrong with them. And in reference to trauma, many of my clients have complex trauma or PTSD, in which dysfunctional reality testing is fueled by unregulated impulse control, which Tyson will be addressing in a few moments. And dysfunctional reality testing in trauma clients shows up in flashbacks of past traumatic events that can lead to a total loss of awareness for the present situation. So the EQ subscales of self-awareness and self-perception are integrated within the reality testing competency. And this is why all 15 EQ subscales are important to learn. Each subscale helps the other and works as a unified team in your overall EQ. And one strategy to better regulate reality testing that I offer to my trauma clients that can be universally applied to everyone is the importance of word choice. I ask my clients to be more aware of the words they use. For instance, are they using absolute words like always, never, and instead of more fact-based words like, well, there may have been a couple of times when. And this brings a person out of extremes and back into a middle ground based on the reality of a situation. And I still catch myself saying absolute words, and it's a limitation of mine, which I'm aware of. So I place my husband in charge of listening to these types of words, and when I say them, he'll stop me and he'll ask me, Kathysue, do you really mean always? To which I then have to stop and reevaluate my word choice. So having a balanced sense of reality means you don't exaggerate, overstate, or are too dramatic. And your perspective is more fact-based than emotion-based. So I'll stop here. We'll check in to see if my colleagues see any questions from our listeners. And if not, I'll send it back to Tyson for his discussion on impulse control.
Well, thank you, Kathysue, and thank you, Cinzia. And as I look through the audience, I do not see any questions at this time. So I will go ahead and talk about impulse control. And as we learned a little bit earlier, there was emotional hijacking, there was the communication piece when we were talking about the various levels of our emotions taking over our control for conversations and decision making. So what does that look like on the impulse side? Well, when we talk about impulse control, we're looking at the characteristics. So from a low perspective, if somebody doesn't get easily overwhelmed, if it's not a family-based situation or something that's going to be a trigger to them, low impulse control can come across as lacking self-control. So excuse me, if you have low impulse control, you lack the ability to control your impulses. So you can come across as lacking self-control, impulsive, overly talkative, to the point that they monopolize conversations, and perhaps short-fused and quick to anger. If a person is in the middle, not on the high end, not on the low end, the person may come across as not always engaged or exercise to hold back, filter their responses, and decide against an initial impulse to act or speak. But on the high end, one can effectively delay their impulses, which in turn allows for more carefully made and better decisions. But beware, because too high of an impulse control can be just as bad as too low of an impulse control. If you're too high on the impulse control with little balance between the other composites, it can come across as withdrawn or withholding in conversation, or you're overly structured and planned and you're emotionally detached. This is why balance is so critical for emotional social intelligence. Impulse control must be balanced with flexibility, stress tolerance, and assertiveness. So I want to share a quick story that I would want to share with you and why I find developing strong impulse control is critical for every business professional, since it increases confidence in stressful situations and allows individuals to persevere in achieving long-term goals. So during my experience, I noticed an improvement in my impulse control. I had more control over my day and was not stressed out by uncertainty or minor setbacks I faced. Whenever I was presented with a stressful situation or many decisions, I utilized techniques like taking a deep breath, counting to 10, removing myself from the situation and coming back 5 minutes later as a way to ground myself. This helped me stay calm and exercise an improved level of impulse control. Through this process, I have learned that I have a great deal of control over my own emotions. And although we may encounter stressful and frustrating situations that are beyond our control, we can improve our daily approaches and responses to stress by incorporating new stress tolerance techniques to make us more flexible. And as a result, we can confidently face each day with assertiveness and a sense of control to manage our impulses. So an action strategy is to conduct an inventory of what makes you impatient or impulsive and write it down, and then set a few strategies to increase or remain calm to reduce your impulses. So that's the close out of the piece on impulse control. And I'd like to turn it back to the audience quick to ask, does anybody have any questions? And I don't see any. So Cinzia, I will give it back to you.
Yeah, so the discussion on reality testing and impulse control was super interesting. On impulse control, I'm particularly curious, Tyson, because you are also an executive coach. In your experience in this role, how does impulse control affect the well-being of a team? Because definitely, as a leader of a team, the impulse control is an important element for the well-being of a team. What do you think about that?
That's a great question, and it absolutely does affect the well-being of a team. I've seen it a couple different ways. One where you do have an individual who has little to no impulse control. So every topic that's brought up is an immediate dive into a conversation or a suggestion of solutions right off the bat. And the team never fully understands the issue at hand because they're always trying to solve the problem that was originally presented. It also eliminates the discovery process and that communication to identify what truly is going on. A lot of the time, we like to start with the 5 whys to identify the true root cause. On the other end, if teams do not communicate well, so let's say they are at the extreme high end of impulse control, they're more of an introvert, they don't speak too much, they internalize all the information, then it stagnates the process and the team becomes more mundane and muddled because they don't communicate or share their ideas and thoughts, and it becomes more of an individualistic group trying to solve a problem versus a collective. So I try to have that balance with the individual to teach them to speak up when they have an idea, raise their hand, do some exercises to get out of that fearful zone and make those comments, or I ask them to pause for a beat when they think they need to interject. Just take 3 seconds and allow the room to breathe or a person to speak, because you may have a similar thought, idea, or presentation to the conversation.
That's a great answer. Covers a lot of different topics, and particularly like the 5 whys to go to the root cause, which is I'm a big fan of Lean. So 5 whys does resonate with me really. Kathysue, I know you had a question for me.
Yes, I did. I wanted to know how you balance problem solving with being more aware of your own emotions, which is really, the emotional self awareness subscale that we talked about in one of our previous podcasts.
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting question. Very good question. I think sometimes, and all of us, we can think about episodes in our life. We go into a solution mode and we think the solution that we have identified is the most effective, but something at the emotional level doesn't sound right, right? You feel something is off. And that's our subconscious that is telling us something. Understanding how our emotion impacts our decisions is critical. And there are very, very simple questions we can try to ask ourselves. For example, and looks obvious, but how many times do we ask ourselves, am I aware of what I'm feeling right now? Or we just feel anger and we don't even realize it's anger? Or do I know what trigger my emotions? What's the trigger elements that makes me upset or disappointed or happy? Or do I recognize when I am upset and how this impact my decision of doing something, my approach to solving a challenge? Do I know which emotions affect my performance? And this is really interesting at work, for example. I have an example on myself. I'm a very emotional person, so I always have to take a step back before reacting to something. So when we get all this flow of emotions, there are different ways we can react to that. We can ignore the signals and go straight ahead for our solution, or we can go also into the emotional paralysis. And that's where, for example, coaches can really help, or anyone in theory that is able to listen, but usually coaches are trained and skilled to help when someone is feeling stuck, cannot move forward, and especially when it's more challenging to acknowledge and recognize the emotions and how they're prevent us from moving forward. So that's how I see the two elements connected. I'm checking if there are questions. I don't see any questions, so I would hand it over to you, Tyson.
Yes, Cinzia, thank you. You know what? You make me think of a question, and I'd like to direct it towards Kathysue. Um, Kathysue, since you specialize in trauma, my question is around the reality testing. And if you are dealing with an individual who is in a trauma inducing environment or a relationship, how does reality testing assist them? But what do you need to be aware of so that it doesn't complicate the situation?
Thanks, Tyson. Well, when I'm working with a trauma client, reality testing really is, it can be just described like I did before as being triggered into a flashback, and that's really our where it really falls mostly when it comes to reality testing is how, when they are in a flashback, how do they get back to the present moment? There's just so many moving parts with a trauma client. It extends beyond just making them emotionally aware. It's more like helping them through the maze of emotions, like to the other side, so they can breathe, calm their physiological and psychological symptoms down in a 1-2 step process. I tell my clients that first they need to become physically calm, and second, they need to regain their cognitive focus. And oftentimes, this is done with the help of another person that they can trust. I have a colleague and good friend. His name is Dr. John King, who was sex trafficked from a very young age. And what he decided to do is he calls it a brains trust. So he assigned and created a brains trust for himself. And that's because there are many times there are situations where he couldn't bring himself through being emotionally hijacked into a flashback. So he needed to have help. And so Dr. King calls that his brains trust. And he assigned a person, and that person to help him out of his triggered process or maze of confusion back into the reality of the present moment is his wife, and her name is Mel. And to be able to go from being triggered back into the present moment is different for everyone. But Dr. King found this to work for him. And when he's triggered into a flashback and he can't seem to bring himself back into the present moment, Mel does the same thing. It's consistent. She gently touches his hand and she speaks his first name softly and gently, as if she's walking with him through the storm to the other side. And so he slowly comes back to the present. Um, so it's different for everybody as a trauma client when they're triggered, but that's just one example of what works for this gentleman. And I'll stop there. We're getting toward the end, and I'm not sure if there's anybody who has any questions.
I am not seeing any questions, but thank you for that descriptive information, Kathysue, as well as from you, Cinzia. I think that there are a few good takeaway pieces from our conversation today. One is to remember our cultural differences and our norms when we look to solve problems. Not everybody's going to have the same viewpoint or focal perspective. And so a little bit of impulse control can assist there when we are emotionally triggered, either happy or upset and mad, but to always maintain that communication to make sure that it's facilitating and beneficial versus deconstructive and breaking down the conversation in the groups. And if we ever have an event that's triggering and traumatic, to remember to pull ourselves back into reality and to ground ourselves after we've secured a safe physical environment, to wander through that maze of emotions. And I love that, Kathysue, because we all often hear a roller coaster of emotions, right? But it's a maze of navigating what's making us sad, what's making us happy, what's making us angry, and taking note of it so then we can then improve it to our benefit and to those around us. So unless we have any other comments from our panelists.
I wanted to add just one comment. Can you hear me? Because I got offline for a second.
Yes.
Yeah. So my comment is again just to consider these different categories we've gone through, not just as absolute numbers. Okay, it's great. I have a high score here. I'm super skilled at that. It's all about balance. I would like to emphasize this aspect. It's all about balance. How you balance your problem solving skills with your ability to empathize with others, but also your ability to be assertive or your ability to build interpersonal relationships. So all these elements are interconnected and shouldn't be looked at in silos, right? So I'm great at this. I will be using these skills only or mainly because it's my strength. Now it's important to consider it in comparison to the others. That's what my key takeaway, I would say.
Yep.
All right. And Kathysue, anything from you?
No, I think we're good. I think you both added some really nice things and good takeaways, and we're at our 5:30 mark. And as long as there's no other questions, I think we're good.
Okay. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for joining us tonight and for the knowledge sharing. Again, remember, you can always send any of us a message here on LinkedIn. And if you would like to take the assessment, you can reach out to any one of us as well. Thank you for joining us, and then have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much.